Hello, everyone, and good evening, and thank you all for coming. I know it's a busy night, both earlier with especially those of us with children at the middle school, and then activities, later in the night. But this is an important forum that the school committee wanted to have to be able to gauge the public interest and to be able to share some information about where the school department is with the submission of the statement of interest for the new high school project, as well as to be able to hear some important feedback, both on the document itself as well as some of the thoughts and ideas and comments and visions that we as a community may want to share around the future of Wakefield High School. I'd like to do some introductions and then talk about the agenda very briefly. But let me also mention we have a bit of a hard stop at 8:30. That's certainly not to in any way stop the conversation tonight, because this hopefully is going to spark a conversation that will continue for many months. But we do have a hard start tonight as the school committee needs to be across town at the finance committee meeting at Town Hall for the FY20 budget. But that being said, I'd like to, go, if we could go up the table, introduce ourselves, and then we'll talk about the agenda very briefly. Joe?
Sure. Joe Bertrand. I'm the chairman of the Permanent Building Committee for the town.
I'm Mike Biffling. I'm the school business administrator for the Wakefield Public Schools.
Good evening. I'm Amy McLeod. I'm the high school principal.
Good evening. Doug Lyons, superintendent.
Good evening. I'm Don Walter, principal with Dornwoody Architects.
Michelle Rogers with Dornwoody Architects.
Good evening. I'm Bob Troy. I'm the recently new facility director for Wakefield Public Schools.
Great, thank you. So what we have is we have a couple of obviously prepared agenda items, and then we want to be able to make sure that folks have an opportunity to share thoughts and ideas and concerns. The superintendent will speak first, going to do an overview of the facility's needs, talking about the MSBA process and the SOI itself. The principal will then speak about, about our NEASC, the accreditation matters with regard to the issues for the future of the high school and the accreditation piece. Mr. Bertrand will speak about the town's role and the role that the Permanent Building Committee plays in this important role. And then the architects will share a presentation that they have, not only about the SOI, but about some of the options that have already been vetted, and to remind the community about those types of things. Those are not solid, but those are the type of things that the community looked at the last time we did some pre-feasibility work back in 2016. So that's the overview tonight. Again, thank you all very, very much for coming. My name is Tom Markham, the chair of the school committee. So, Mr. Lyons.
Thank you. Should I step up to the podium?
Sure.
So, I'll step up. Good evening. Thank you so much for coming. So where we are now in our work is really where our issue is the facility that we're in has kind of reached a point where it's kind of getting to the end of its shelf life. And so it's at a point where it's really impacting our academic programming. And in FY19, we made it to the second round of the MSBA process, where you're accepted into the grant to either renovate or build a new school. So the good news is we made it to the second round. And so as part of that, they came out and did a site visit. And as part of their site visit, it really became abundantly clear both to them as a visiting team, but it also kind of reaffirmed with us that there are really some significant gaps in areas of our school that really need to be attended to. What makes it particularly difficult is when students are transitioning from a brand new middle school as well, and they come here, they're kind of used to being able to work in project rooms, to do certain science, technology, and engineering activities that this facility just doesn't allow at this time. And so in the visit, what was highlighted was that our science labs continue to be undersized. There's issues with storage, chemical storage. There's also issues with kind of ventilation if we were to do or to try to do labs in a way that we would like or that schools currently are doing today. And so science continues to be an area of significant concern for us. As part of our information collection, we've also kind of allowed teacher leaders to contribute to our data collection for this year as well. So science is one area. Music is another area that is significantly limited in space. There is some irony to this because during our site visit with MSBA, this was not staged, but when we brought the team down to the music wing, there was a quartet of saxophones kind of being instructed in what was an old janitor's closet. You know, just, you know, in 2018, 2019, really just not acceptable. And so music, it just really is a concern. Not only instrumental lessons, choral lessons, as well as larger group lessons. So that's particularly affected as well. Performing arts, as well as kind of art classes where we're doing sculpture, clay and sculpture, and kind of photography. Those areas are particular areas of concern as well. And so what we have and the feedback that we got from MSBA is that the footprint of our school in regard to square footage isn't necessarily a negative, but what is a really tremendous challenge is kind of where the numbers of students are. So technically, we don't have overcrowding per class, but we have micro overcrowding by department and by class or by program, right? So science is one, music is another. Performing arts is also an issue. A high school this size, for us to put on a production, just like with Title IX, we would want our athletes to be able to practice and play on our campus. We want the same thing for our students that are participating and performing arts. For us to put on a production, we have to move to Galvan. And I know that that presents a particular problem in regard to set building, in regard to moving people back and forth, in regard to also occupying that space while they're trying to do things at the Galvan as well. So other areas that were cited, and one area of significant concern is kind of the ADA accessibility piece. Our elevators are undersized. If a student in a wheelchair needed to go to our history floor from our lower level, they would have to take one elevator up one floor, travel across the building, get on another elevator, and then go to the second floor. It would probably take them 8 or 10 minutes to make that transition. That would be if their wheelchair was small enough to fit through the door. And so that's a concern for us. Our courtyard as it exists is not ADA accessible. So those are some things that were really highlighted. The other part is that teaching and learning has just changed, right? Our classrooms were designed initially, this building was designed as a middle school. And at the time when it was designed, the square footage of the classrooms were about 650 square feet. And we know, no mystery, middle schoolers are considerably smaller than our high schoolers. So when we put 25 high schoolers in a classroom that was built for 20 middle schoolers, they just don't all fit, or when they do fit, it's pretty tight and pretty cramped. Normally, MSBA calls for a standard classroom to be 900 square feet and for a lab to be 1,200 square feet. And now our classrooms, just the way that they are configured, are really just undersized, which creates kind of a problem for us. So those are just some needs in regard to our academic programming. We're really looking forward to being part of this process and kind of collaborating with Dorn Whittier because we do think that things need to change, and we're optimistic that in our submission for FY20 to MSBA, we're really optimistic about being accepted into the grant process. You know, one of the things that is important for me to note, and you'll hear more about this both from Dorn Whittier and from some other presenters, but on any given year, it depends. There are 351 communities in the Commonwealth, but the schools that are accepted or moved forward in the grant process, what depends or what moves one school forward and might keep one school where it is, really depends on the needs of that particular community and that particular school. And so although I can stand here and kind of list our needs for our school and say that these are critical and we need to do something about it. Believe it or not, there are other schools that have significant issues with overcrowding, where they have 30 or 40 students in a 600 square foot classroom. That obviously would put them ahead on the list over us. And so not something that I like to report, but on any given year, it's about the cohort that applies for the grant to participate. So that's what I have to report at this point. I'm open for any questions that you might have at the end of our presentation. But again, thank you very much for coming. At this point, I'd like to introduce Amy McLeod, our high school principal, to talk about our NEASC accreditation.
Good evening, everybody. So much of what I could report out of the NEASC visit would parallel a lot of what Doug has just talked about. So I think the process with the MSBA and NEASC is many of the same findings, but I just want to talk a little bit about the process. The last decennial visit that we had at the high school was in 2011, and at that time there were a number of things that were cited that needed to be worked on. And so the good news is that we worked and corrected a number of those things. In fact, the last visiting team that came out right before the group from the MSBA came out was in late September of this year. And during that visit, they actually commended us for working on a number of things. I can't take credit for any of those things because I wasn't here for any of them, but I want to point those out. The school has made gains in the time and the funding and the support of its core values, its belief about learning, and its vision for what a graduate should look like. They commended us for the time, the funding, and the facilities focused on student support and student learning around the student support offices. Teacher collaboration, professional growth, the opportunities that are here, we were cited as having turned those around. The full implementation of consistent curricular programs across the school were commended, and they talked about how they had seen a great improvement in those. And finally, they talked about the consistent delivery of those programs and also the services to support all students to be able to access those problems. However, we're still falling behind in an area, and that's what sort of parallels the MSBA process. So after they had the visit in late September, the NEASC Commission on Public Schools met in January, and when they come together, they kind of review all the school statuses who are up in the queue at that point. And so the first thing to notice is that our school's accreditation is continuing. And I know there are some myths out in the community and some questions about the community about what that means. It's really important to understand that there is a mutually beneficial relationship between NEASC and their schools. Right? NEASC wants us to stay accredited, and we want to stay accredited with NEASC. So it's a collaborative relationship in which we're going to work together. We've corrected a number of things, but there are some things that we still need to work on. So even though they are very interested and they have continued our accreditation, at this point we've moved to probation for a failure to adhere to the standards on community resources for the building. So it's actually curriculum and community resources for learning, and that's where the building services fall under. Specifically in their report, what they talked about is it's very similar to what Doug talked about. The facility has reached a point where teaching and learning is being negatively impacted. And I think that small NEASC committee that came out in September to visit the building found many of the same things that the MSBA visit found. They spoke of the pervasive roof leaks, the poor heat, ventilation, and AC. The inappropriate accessibility. We talked about students who potentially could not get to the second floor because of elevator issues, or students who had to move between the basement and the main floor because of elevator issues, and potentially not being able to access programs or courses that were offered in different areas of the building because of that. We spent some time talking about the outdated science labs. I think we've done a great job doing what we can in those labs, and I commend our science department for that. However, that only gets us so far. And so there are pieces of teaching and learning that can't go on in science labs. Again, I think we are staying within the confines or within the guidelines of what DESE lays out in terms of what we need for our students to be successful graduates, but we know we could go further and deeper and better with our students with an updated facility. A few of the other spaces I'm not sure that Doug mentioned, art spaces like the photography lab that's currently in an updated, what used to be a bathroom. We've now turned into a photography lab. We have culinary spaces. Culinary does a terrific job. Any of the teachers will attest to that. They serve us great lunches a few days a week. It's amazing what they could do in that program and the skills that our students could learn if they were in an updated facility that then allowed them to go out into the industry ready for what the industry will offer them. Doug talked about the music spaces as well. So there are a number of these, but I think the most important piece for me, when we talk about space and how we use that space, our building is not flexible. Our building is not ready to meet the needs of a 21st century learner. And so teachers in their classroom spaces are confined to classroom spaces that are not very flexible. So if you want to do small group work, or if there's a group of students who need to go do some research, you'll often find that we have groups of students who may be working in small groups in the hallway, just to have spaces so that they're near the teacher can see them, but that they're away from the classroom and not impacting the rest of the learners in the classroom. Teaching and learning doesn't look anymore like me standing up and delivering information to 30 kids in front of me. It looks like small group instruction, flexible grouping, students doing different tasks at different times. And so I think that we're talking about necessarily not more space, but better space that would fit the needs of our students, of our 21st century learners, and the kind of teaching and learning that we know that our teachers are capable of doing and that our students deserve. So I think the findings of NEASC parallel very nicely with the findings of MSBA. I'm very excited about this process and the next steps that we're going to talk about tonight. I think the vision of what's going to be laid out and the possibility of what's to come is really exciting for Wakefield High School, and I'm just happy to be part of this process, so thank you.
I'd just like to add before Joe comes up to the podium is that in the process of us collecting data for our FY20 submission to MSBA, we talked to the teacher leaders and the department heads, and one of the department heads shared with me, think about Galvan, and could you imagine what we could do with a new school, right? So teachers are doing an amazing job with a limited facility. And so her question to me was, could you imagine what we could do with a school like the Galvan, right? Like a 21st century high school. So I just bring that up because it really resonated with me, and it really highlights kind of the gap that we think exists. Joe.
As indicated, my name is Joe Bertrand. I'm the chairman of the Permanent Building Committee. For all of you who may not know, the Permanent Building Committee was created about 12, 13 years ago. Our focus is to oversee the entire constructions on any building project for the town that's over $100,000. So far, the Permanent Building Committee has built the Wakefield History Museum, did some modifications for Town Hall, did what you're sitting in right now. We also did the $74 million Galvan Middle School and just completed the Walton renovations. Presently, the town has not only this project in line, hopefully, but also, as you may be aware, last spring town meeting, a proposal for some renovations to the police station were made, and that was also overseen by the Permanent Building Committee as far as the selection of an architect and selection of design. That unfortunately did not pass an election. There also is, from what I understand, a possibility of a feasibility study for the DPW garage. So just that you know that there's other things that the town is thinking about. That feasibility study will be on this spring town meeting. The Permanent Building Committee has indicated we, in 2015 and 2016, as part of a town meeting article, performed a feasibility study for a new high school. The PBC selected Doran Whittier, who is the architect, who will be speaking to you about their options. But I thought I'd just briefly give you an idea of what is entailed as far as not only for the Permanent Building Committee, but also dealing with the MSBA. Once a selection has been made, the Permanent Building Committee, in accordance with regulations of the MSBA, then has to have an advisory committee. And that we had one at the Galvan, and the high school will have one too when and if it's selected. The advisory committee then will be advise the Permanent Building Committee on design options and things of that nature. During this entire process, the Permanent Building Committee, along with town officials, will be meeting with the MSBA during the entire process. And I thought I'd give you some of the things that we have to do. We have to, once it's selected, we generally pick what's known as an OPM, or an Owner's Project Manager. And that company would advise and consult throughout the entire process in design, value engineering, scope of the work, general contractors' pre-qualifications, subcontractors' pre-qualifications, and oversight of the design process itself, as well as the oversight of the construction process all the way to completion. Once you select an OPM, it would then be the process to select the designer for the project and create what's known as a feasibility study. Doran Whittier will be talking a little bit about that as well. Once that feasibility study, this is not, what we did was a pre-feasibility study for the Permanent Building Committee. This is a feasibility study. And then once that feasibility study is in, you then present it to the MSBA. You go through that particular process, and you then start to prepare what's known as the schematic design process. In between that, and what we did at the Galvan, is that the Permanent Building Committee then went and hired what's known as a CM at risk, which is a construction company that does the construction. And the advantage to that is that they are involved in the design process, they're involved in the schematic design process, so that there is less and less confusion as to what the design process is. In construction, CM at risk is a delivery method that entails a commitment by the construction company to deliver the project with a guaranteed maximum price. And that is obviously important because the very next step is the funding of the project. And the funding of the project then is done through town meeting. More than likely, a project of this scope is going to have to be a 2.5 override, which would then require an election, just as you may recall we did for the Galvan. Once that funding project is complete, the funding of the project is completed and it's passed town meeting and that process, then we would have what's known as a detailed design stage. And finally, after all of those stages, you begin the construction and hopefully completion. So the process, all of these things are done in conjunction with the MSBA. So as Doran Whittier will also show, it is a complex process, it's a complicated process, and unfortunately, it's not a short one either. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Before the architect speak, I'd just like to welcome to the room and thank our Senator, State Senator Jason Lewis is here this evening joining us. Is there anything that you would like to say at this time? Or? Okay, thank you, Senator, but want to thank you for being here. Folks?
Thank you, Tom. Good evening. Once again, I'm Don Walter, Principal with Doran Whittier Architects. And we're going to take you through a few slides here. Start with a quick overview of the submission that's going to be going in here in April to the MSBA, the Statement of Interest. Review the process that we went through. It's really 2015 into 2016, about a year-long process for the feasibility study. Do a quick look at some of the conceptual options that we developed. Along with those were some costs. And then talk in a little more detail about the MSBA process. You've got a little bit of flavor of all of this so far. So I will take you back through where we were back in 2016. We had completed this pre-feasibility study, which included a comprehensive building analysis of this existing building, educational programming and visioning. I'll talk about what that is here in a minute. And then these options that give you an idea of what some of the solutions might have been to the issues within the building. Then, of course, in 16, 17, and 18, the district submitted SOIs. Doug talked about the nature of other communities, buildings within the state, and that plays an important role as to who gets accepted. The other thing that's really important is there's a finite amount of money at any given time. It's funded on an annual basis, 1% off the sales tax. So that's how the MSBA is funded, and you get anywhere from 10 to 20 projects accepted on an annual basis. So last year alone, I believe there were 78 SOIs submitted to the MSBA. So while it's not competitive, it really kind of is, because you have to meet a low threshold to get invited in. And then, of course, here in March, the SOI for this year is just being finalized, and there's a due date of April 12th. So the SOI, the statement of interest, what is that? That's basically, first of all, that the district's saying, in this case, the high school is in the worst shape of all of our school buildings. So you acknowledge that, because you only submit one building at a time on any given year. The other thing is, it's a facilities assessment overview, and it's talking about needs, not solutions. So the constraints with the educational program, the space constraints, and the physical conditions of the school, everything is pointed out and brought forward. As I mentioned, it does not include any options or project costs. That's what the feasibility study with MSBA does. So in terms of what we did throughout the 2015 year to the beginning of 2016, basically a three-pronged approach. And we started with an existing building space needs analysis and building analysis of the building as it sits here today. You're seeing a floor plan of the main floor and one of the upper floors of the building. Red, green, yellow. Red are spaces that are 10% and greater, smaller than the MSBA guidelines. Green are 10% and greater than the MSBA guidelines. And yellow is what kind of falls in between, anywhere from 10% smaller to 10% larger than what the MSBA states within their guidelines for space within the building. This is a great diagram to represent what you have here in Wakefield in the high school. There's a lot of red. There's a fair amount of green. There's not a lot of yellow. So it was mentioned that there's, the building is oversized perhaps for a high school of this population, but the spaces that contribute to it being larger aren't part of the core academic spaces. You're seeing, down in some of the science areas, some of the general classroom areas, the cafeteria, the original gymnasium. The field house isn't colored on this. That contributes greatly to the overall square footage. It's not colored because it's not part of an allowed MSBA space. It used to be that MSBA would say, no, you can't build a field house even if you want to pay for it yourself. Today, you could possibly get a field house in addition to a regular gymnasium with the way the MSBA works. So some things have changed in the 3 years since this was done. The assessment that we did was educational, it was space related, but it was also a full team of architects and engineers that went through and did a visual assessment of the building. So, as I said, architects, structural engineers, MEP engineers, hazardous materials, civil site. It was a full complement of consultants. We also did a space needs analysis, and that's going through and seeing what size, what are the proper number and sizes of spaces for core academic classrooms, for your science rooms, for your art, for your music, your cafeteria, and auditorium, administrative space, guidance space, special education. So really a comprehensive look at what the space needs would be for an ideal high school, just looking at a program. And so you can see it's about 230,000 square feet in this case. And The diagram that you see are, the blue are the core academic, admin, special ed, phys ed, and so forth. And then in addition to that, we invited administration, staff, teachers, parents, students, the general public to participate in visioning sessions. And what we did is we sat down, actually in the cafeteria, in large groups and broke into smaller tables and talked about what the future of Wakefield High School might look like. Talking about student-centered learning, talking about project-based learning, talking about a 21st century facility, talking about flexibility. All that was discussed, and we started developing these diagrams that you see here, which are right off the tables of the visioning sessions, which between that discussion and the space needs and the physical needs of the building led to developing some conceptual options for the high school. So these are conceptual. They're drawn to scale, but they're not meant to be built from. So they're drawn to scale, they're right size, based upon our understanding of public construction here in Massachusetts for schools. We're able to apply cost to them. One of the options that MSBA will require when you get into a feasibility study with them is what we call a capital improvements only plan. This plan will only address the physical needs of the building. So all of your mechanical, electrical, plumbing, fire protection systems, your technology systems, your building envelope, your roofs, your windows, your doors, your exterior walls. It'll also include costs to make the building handicap accessible. As was discussed, it's very circuitous to try to get around the building if you're someone who's physically challenged. What it does not do is right-size the classrooms. So those classrooms that are in red stay red. I didn't point it out, but there's about 20 classrooms that are all interior classrooms. They have no natural light or view to the outside. Those stay as they are. But there's a cost associated with that. So that becomes your baseline for any other options that you look at as you go in and explore your study with the MSBA. And there's cost associated with that. We also looked at a number of additions and renovations and new construction options. Just going to show you three quickly here tonight because these will change as you get into the study with MSBA. They may be similar, but chances are they will change. So basically what you're seeing is our additions and renovations to the existing building. Anytime you do an addition and renovation project to an existing building, if you have no place to put the students, which we're not aware of any place to bring 1,000 high school students, you have to phase it. You have to do little bits of construction over time. And when you do that, that adds time, that adds money, and it basically creates disruption amongst the daily activities that happen within the school. But this was one option that we looked at to see how additions and renovations could work on the existing site. Also want to quickly show you a couple of new school options. What we've got here, this is actually shadowed underneath the existing building. This orange you see here is the field house and some of the locker and support space next to it. Because what we tried to do in this case, this is when we knew for sure MSBA wasn't going to even allow the construction of a field house, so we said, well, maybe we can just renovate it and build a new high school across Hemlock Street from the existing site. So you're seeing a 3-story new school with the field house across the other side of Hemlock, and actually we were including a pedestrian footbridge in this case. The other thing we did with both new options is we reconfigured the intersection. So Hemlock, Nahant, and Farm became a safer intersection from what you have here today. And then you can see here we had some lower levels with classroom core and then upper levels. So this would have been a 3-story solution. And then lastly, in terms of the options, we also did an option that just basically built all of the new building, 3 stories, on the field side of Hemlock. And when you do that, you build the new building, move the students in, then go back and demolish the existing building and put in play fields that were lost and parking. Before I go there. So there's cost associated with these. You've got a sneak peek. What we did is the cost that we had developed in 2016, we had actually escalated out to 2017, trying to anticipate when a project might move forward. What we did for this presentation was we actually escalated those 2017 dollars out to today's dollars. When we get to the MSBA timeline, you're going to see that we're going to continue out on a timeline beyond today, working with MSBA. So I think what's really important here, when you look at the capital improvement plan, that just fixes what you got, right? So that's going to cost, upwards of $78.4 million. And what's included within those costs are not just the construction, but also what we call the soft cost, or the cost for your owner's project manager, the cost for your design team, the cost for construction contingencies, the cost for any testing that is necessary within the building. The other thing that's important about this option too is you can't just come in and do it all at once. So chances are you're going to do this piecemeal over a period of time, and this cost may even be inflated or escalated beyond what's shown up here today. So that's your capital improvement plan. The next one was the addition and renovation plan. You can see $136 million. It's a lot of money. It's also money that will be, you only do it if you're going to get reimbursed from the MSBA, if you're going to get them to participate. The reimbursement rate in Wakefield here today is plus minus about 50%. It changes on an annual basis. So figure you may see anywhere from 40 to say 55% reimbursed on that money that you see up there. There's a lot of formulas built into the MSBA model, so it's not a straight, 50%. It's going to be $68 million we're going to get back. There's allowable cost per square footage, there's allowable site cost, there's allowable cost for your design or your OPM, allowable reimbursement costs on your change orders, things of that nature are all factored in there. So just roughly, we'll say 50%. And then lastly, a new school, depending on which of the two options that we looked at, could be anywhere between $132 and $136 million. What's just so important about between new and ad reno at this level, at this early stage, is that they basically cost the same. If you take an option and build it on the field across the street, you minimize the disruption to the daily activities of the school, and then when it's done, you move the students in there. As opposed to an ad reno, which there's going to be disruption for anywhere from 2 to 3, 3.5, 4 years, depending on what the solution is. So those are some general costs, keeping in mind that there are some reimbursement dollars. You could possibly get reimbursed for the first one. But to get reimbursed for the first one, you'd have to say that our space is fine and the number of spaces we have are fine. So as we sit here today, we don't believe that's the case, but that will come out in your next study. And then lastly, where do we go from here? So as we sit here tonight, we're at the point of submitting a statement of interest. You can see the timeline. Could be 6 to 7 years before you're into a completed project. So you submit in April. By next January, you will be, if you're accepted into what's called the eligibility period. And you can see that's a up to 270-day period. That's where you get your building committee, which is already organized, your initial compliance certificate submitted to MSBA. You go through and agree upon your enrollment with MSBA. You secure your funds for the feasibility study that we'll be following up front. So it's 270 days or 9 months, but based upon the MSBA board schedules, you probably get invited in approximately the next year, February of 2021. You then secure your project team, you hire an owner's project manager. Once they're on board, you hire your design team, which takes you into the feasibility study, which is approximately 1 year between the initial feasibility study, and the schematic design. The schematic design will provide drawings of site plans, floor plans, elevations, images. We'll know what the building systems are. We'll know what the structure is going to be. We'll know what the finishes are going to be. You'll know what all your fees are going to be. And what that does, that gets you to what's called your project funding agreement with the MSBA. Everyone agrees upon what the price is going to be, what your reimbursement is going to be, which brings you into sometime in that fall, if you choose, of 2022, voting and accepting the project. If you then accept the project, you go from schematic design through design development and construction documents and bidding and then construction, which you see the design right here, and the builds in January of 2023, going for about a year to January of 24, and then your construction taking anywhere from 18, 19 months, possibly up to 30 months, depending on what solution is chosen. So that's a quick lesson in MSBA and their particular timelines. So I think what we're going to do now, turn it back to Tom and Doug for questions.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you. One of the things that we wanted to talk about before we do the questions is what some of the next steps are that we know about in the coming weeks and for the rest of this year, because we've been fortunate to get lots of comments and ideas and thoughts from members of the school community and the town at large. So we'd just like to share some of those thoughts as we work into questions and maybe be able to land somewhere. So next week, the school committee will have a special meeting to deliberate on the SOI that's been prepared by the superintendent and the working group, reviewed and vetted by the architects. The school committee will be voting next week on April the 8th. The town council will deliberate and vote on the SOI. And as you heard both from the superintendent and Dawn, April 12th is the deadline for the state. So we will have the document submitted by April 12th. And in the course of the time between April 12th and the end of the year, December, January, when we anticipate hearing back from the state whether we're invited to move forward, one of the things that we have been talking about was the establishment of a school committee superintendent, sort of a working group. And the working group would really, first and foremost, we'd like to be able to keep some of the momentum going, keep some of the interest strong, and to be able to, at a minimum, establish some ideas around the if-then statements that are fairly obvious that we've heard lots about. The if-then statements being, come next December, if the MSBA says yes and invites Wakefield forward, what are we going to do? Obviously, we've just heard from Dawn the steps that are required procedurally, but how do we as a town and a school community get organized around that? And also, as just on the realistic side or the pragmatic side, the if-then statement, what happens if come December, January, the MSBA does not invite us to move forward? That conversation began in earnest a little bit at the superintendent's state of the schools back in January of this year. It was a healthy conversation, although we had to slow it down a little bit because we were getting ahead of ourselves. But I think it would be in our interest as a community to get ahead of that. So the type of things the school committee will be talking about in the next couple of meetings will be around the establishment of the next steps piece. And I'm sure that if that does move forward, we will be seeking members to join the working group, volunteers from the community at large, the school community, parents, townspeople at large, to be able to help us sort of work on those if-then statements, because we want to be as prepared as we can continue to be. You may recall there are lots of energy in the galvanized movement, lots of energy around that, and we want to be prepared when that time comes. We'll obviously keep our fingers crossed, if you will, that the state will see that it's Wakefield's turn soon or soon next, and be best prepared for that. So those are some things that the school committee has on its plate in the coming weeks. And so certainly if that comes to be, we'll love to have some community volunteers to help join that working group and work on thoughts on some of those if-then statements. What if yes? and what if no. Next, we'd like to invite any elected officials that are here tonight. I know there are a handful of both town and some state officials, and we'd like to invite any local officials that would like to make a comment. Please to come up and do so. Sure. Town Councilor Ann Santos.
Hi everyone, my name's Ann McGonigal Santos. I've been on town council for 6 years. I'm almost a lifelong member of Wakefield. I graduated from Wakefield High School in 1984, and I can tell you that the building is not this room, but exactly the same as it was 35 years ago. I have a senior now, and going back to Parents' Night, the energy of the high school teachers is amazing, the quality of the teachers, but man, the building is just not supporting what our students need. I just want to correct something Mr. Bertrand said. We did not do a 2.5 override for the Galvan. We're not fans of overrides. We like debt exclusions. So debt exclusions target a specific project. Your taxes go up for a little bit while we pay off the project, and then they come off. Overrides are permanent. Melrose is having one right now, you know, and I think Reading. So if debt exclusion is the way we would be looking to do this. I can tell you that members, the majority of members, I don't want to speak for everyone, I think everyone's strongly in favor of having a new high school. Tony Longo, who's with me, Peter May, who's with me, I certainly know they are in favor of that. We have, for those of you who are around for the Galvan, the energy behind the Galvan, the community support was very impactful for the Mass Building Association, and I think we're going to need that again. We're going to need that kind of organization, and to let them know that the town is behind the project. That is really important for them to understand, for them to support the project, to grant it to us at that stage. They also look at the feasibility, the financial feasibility of the town, and we're in great shape. We have a AAA bond rating, which is one of the strongest you can get. So from that perspective, the town is in good shape. So I think that, I know that the town's council will do whatever it can to see this through. My kids aren't going to see it, but that's okay, because the future of Wakefield needs to have a school that's as good as the Galvan. So the town council is absolutely going to collaborate with the school department happily to make sure, hopefully, that this can happen. And you know, I think from a financial standpoint, to get half that funding and then do a debt exclusion is something that the majority of town, once they hear what the numbers are, will find that it's really worth it for our students. Thank you.
Yes, Senator.
Hi, folks. I'm State Senator Jason Lewis, and it's great to see so many people here tonight for this very important discussion. I wanted to be here and send regards as well from the other members of the legislative delegation for Wakefield, Representative Paul Broda and Representative Donald Wong. And we stand squarely with the town council and the school committee and the community in advocating for a new Wakefield High School. You probably wouldn't be here if you didn't agree that there's nothing more important to any community than its high school. I would argue that the high school is kind of the anchor tenant, if you will, for a community. And it's very clear, as has been explained exhaustively tonight, and as I'm sure as you know firsthand, that we need a new high school in the community. I want to thank the members of the town council and the school committee and the building committee and the administration, both the superintendent's office and at the high school, for all the hard work that you've done now for a number of years to advance this project forward. And I know it's very frustrating, you know, that the project is not already accepted into the Massachusetts School Building Authority program. But we will get there. We will get there. Just to give you an idea of perhaps, you know, why we aren't in the program already this year, it's extremely competitive. In the most recent year, there were 130 schools from all over Massachusetts that submitted statements of interest to the Massachusetts School Building Authority. They actually have two different programs that the authority operates. But out of that 130, we were definitely one of the schools that made the cut. Sort of they winnow the number down, but we were definitely one of those. And that led to a visit from the Massachusetts School Building Authority to Wakefield High School, spent about half a day meeting, touring the school, seeing firsthand. Unfortunately, there were only 12 schools that actually got invited into the program this year, 12 out of that 130. The MSBA and the state legislature and all of us would certainly like to be able to have more schools get invited into the program and sooner. The problem, as is often the case with most things, it's resources. And the way that, if you're interested, the way that the Massachusetts School Building Authority is funded is basically 1 penny from the sales tax. So every time you buy something and you pay 6 1/4 in state sales tax, 1 penny out of that 6 1/4, so 15%, goes into the Massachusetts School Building Authority Trust Fund. And that money is then what they can borrow against to fund school building projects. High schools obviously are much more expensive projects than, say, an elementary school. So the exact number of projects that they can accept into the program each year is dependent on the mix of projects, how many high schools, middle schools, elementary schools, et cetera, and the needs of each of those projects. So the bottom line is here, go out and buy lots of things and pay sales tax. I'm only half joking. And, we are discussing in the legislature ways that we could try to increase the funding for the Massachusetts School Building Authority to help, provide more resources to accelerate the building of schools. But I can tell you, no question, Wakefield High School needs to be rebuilt, will be rebuilt. There are many, many other schools as well, around the state that similarly need to be renovated or rebuilt. So again, thanks for all your support. Oh, and I would also echo that the two things that the Massachusetts School Building Authority is looking for in finally making the decision to accept us into the program is, number one, obviously the need, and we can make a strong case there, and I think our statement of interest that we'll be submitting will be even stronger this year, thanks to all the hard work, than even in past years. And number two, they want to know that the community is ready to step up and support it, because the Massachusetts School Building Authority will put in, I think we're estimating 60%, about right? 50, a little higher than that. So somewhere between 50 and 60% of the total cost, and then the rest comes from the community. So for them to step up to start that whole process, they want confidence that the community is ready to back the project. And I have no doubt that will be the case, but we want to continue to show them that education is highly valued in Wakefield, and that in particular support is there for a new high school. And the legislative delegation will certainly stand with you all every step of the way. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Others? Mr. Longo.
I'm not going to take up a lot of your time because I know you got some important questions to ask. The last thing you want to do is listen to a politician while you're here to talk about options for a new high school. But we've seen a red-hot housing market in Wakefield. And one of the first things you see when you come into town is the Galvan Middle School. And that makes people want to come to Wakefield. They want to move to Wakefield. So you saw the numbers put up. We have, the capital improvement plan, the additions and renovations, and the new school costs. I may not be the smartest man in the room tonight, but it makes a lot of sense just to draw up a new school. And to Ann's point, I graduated Wakefield High in 1983. We have a freshman girl here, and on parent night, to Ann's point, nothing has changed. There were still some initials of mine in school desks. But thank you tonight, and we'll get this done one way or another.
Mr. May.
Well, a lot of folks here tonight. It's great to see. This is a very, very important project. My name is Peter May. I'm the chair of the town council. I probably should identify myself. The project, whether it turns out to be a rehabilitation endeavor, a brand new school, or some combination of both, we will not know until the feasibility study has been completed. We will not request a feasibility study until we get into the first round of town cities being approved to move forward. Once we are invited into the first round, we can roll into the feasibility study and put that cost into the school. This is a very important project for the entire community and a top priority for the town council. We know how successful the Galvan Middle School is. Everyone was mentioning that tonight. It's been attracting new families to our town and for helping students excel in today's competitive world. The town council now has a statement of interest for the Massachusetts School Building Authority, and we will all be reviewing that currently. We will be sending in any revisions that we deem necessary for us to be successful this year. We'll also be voting on the statement of interest in the next town council meeting on April 8th. We requested, the timetable be moved this year to allow the town council more opportunity to put the best statement of interest in the hands of Mass School Building Authority. The town council continues to work closely with our school committee and our state delegation about the school. Our AAA bond rating will get us a lower rate, and now is a particularly good time to borrow money. The interest rates seem to be reversing themselves at this time. Most likely, we will have a debt exclusion, as Ann mentioned earlier, for the high school, same as the middle school. The town is also finishing up payment on 3 of its bonds shortly. That's an important part. So $1.3 million a year is going to be removed from our debt each year. So that also can help fund without raising taxes. Stay tuned on this project. Once we are approved, we will be moving quickly through many rounds with the MSBA. The town needs to be prepared to vote yes on this project. A no vote, if that happens, I don't know how long it will take then, maybe 10 years. We're going to drop to the bottom. There's 351 towns and cities, and you don't want to be on the bottom. We can get this done, but honestly, it's huge that the town supports this right away. And even though it's 6-7 years down the road, if we don't have support right away out of the blocks, the MSBA sees that we're not really that interested in doing this, whether it's a renovation, a new building, or a combination of the two, we're going to be dead in the water. We have to have huge support. It can't be, we can't be losing this by 10 votes. So keep it in mind that this school needs a lot of TLC, and it's not just Band-Aids at this point. We've had the Band-Aids for a long time. So please support the school committee, the town council, all the reps, state delegation. If we don't have all the support, this is going to fail. And as Apollo 13 said, failure is not an option. We really have to get this done. And thank you. As Tony said, that's enough for politicians. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. So before we open it up to comments, I'd like to introduce my colleagues from the school committee who are here tonight as well. Greg Liakos is here, Vice Chair Chris Callanan, Amy Purcell, and RJ Massey. Thank you for being here as well. Okay, anyone else would be invited to share thoughts, ideas, concerns, or ask questions of any of the panelists. So please come up and identify yourself, and thank you for coming.
Thank you, Bob McLaughlin. Great presentation. Bob McLaughlin, 376 Water Street. This is actually for the architects. Are you familiar with the model school program? Have you done any projects with that at all?
We have not.
No. Would you be interested in looking at that, this project?
Sure. I can tell you, quick overview is that you would still go through the feasibility study process with MSBA.
Correct.
And if you let them know that you're interested in that program, then someplace along the way, they will do an analysis and let you know if there are any schools that fit your needs. So that is a possibility for here.
Yeah, if anybody doesn't understand it, Google it. It's the Model School Program, the Massachusetts School Building Authority, and they essentially, you get another roughly 5% on top of for the reimbursement on top of everything else. And the schools are. My daughter taught at one up in Newburyport, the Bressingham Middle School, actually elementary school, and there's several high schools built across the state using that program. The other question that I had is it feasible to get the high school back where the track is? Is there enough room to put it where the track is right now?
I'm sure anything is feasible. Whether the full building itself could fit back there is not something that we studied because of the nature and the newness of the track at the time, but it absolutely could be studied.
I mean, 5 or 6 years out, I would look at that because Hemlock is going to, it's problematic getting that bridge across Hemlock. Sure. And all the other stuff. This might be a little premature, but the cable station right now, we have WCAT in this building. Are they projected to go back into the high school? Do you know?
Are they
projected to go back into the building, the new building?
We'd have to work with MSBA to see if it could become a reimbursed program.
That was my question.
because students are obviously participating in that, so that is a possibility. We have seen also where they've been taken out of the high school because it's not reimbursed. But as I said with the field house, given that there are now some spaces that MSBA will allow you to build but not reimburse you for, that's always a possibility too.
One of my last comments is I would really skip the renovation. I'm an electrician in the field, and it's just nothing but change orders, as you know, and it's going to be far more effective, cheaper for the long haul. We'll get a brand new building. We go for another 50 years, and I really stay away from renovating and wasting the money on the studies for that. I brought that up at the Galvan school. We should have skipped all that. Looking for renovations and additions and all the other stuff. You're just so much better off going with a new building.
Sure. With what we know about this building,
sure,
we tend to agree with you.
Yeah.
But it is part of the process that you need to exhaust all the possibilities with the MSBA before you
They make you go through that.
Correct.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, it's a lot of money. I think it was, I forget it. It was just a lot of dough. Thank you very much.
Sure.
McLaughlin.
My name is Barb Lispine. I have two kids that are at the Dolbear Elementary School. There's been a lot of discussion tonight that the community needs to show their support, and I'm just curious if you guys can be very specific with what that means. So one example is, when exactly is the town vote? Is that not going to happen until the MSBA has accepted us into the final round? And I wasn't around for the galvanized period. I've heard a lot about it. I think my kids were still babies and in diapers, so I didn't pay as much attention. But like, what specifically did they do there that you need, and the MSBA specifically needs to see from us as a community and parents, et cetera?
Sure. Well, that's a great question. Don, could I ask you, could you go back a couple slides? That timeline that you had, I think, might tell the story nicely. So obviously this timeline anticipates some affirmative support from the MSBA, which we would getting, as my commentary earlier, possibly December, January, the end of this calendar year, the very beginning of the next. If that's a yes, if we get invited into the next step, this is the process that it very likely looks like. And if that's the case, we'd be needing to vote for the town's commitment of its contribution of the dollars in 2022. Whether that was the fall or the spring, those type of parameters are still to be worked out. One of the things that we also hope to do in the establishment of a sort of a working group, a community entity that we want to establish soon after the submission of the SOI, is to answer exactly that type of question. What type of things can we do to keep the momentum strong? So we don't really have anything specific to say. There isn't a meeting to do. There isn't a letter to write. There isn't any of that yet. But certainly we want to be able to keep this on the sort of the hearts and minds of folks. Because granted, the submission now, between now and the end of the year, seems like a long time away. But as we all know, it's really only 7 months. And we should be ready for that. And what that means precisely is really just raising some interest around the community for continuation of what will be a vote, whether it's 2 years away, there will be a vote that will require an awful lot of community information. And some of that information is going to be half about advocating the additional resources. At the end of the day, as the town councilor spoke of, and even Don in his presentation spoke of, there are dollars attached to this. While we all may feel very passionate about the absolute need, there is also a need to demonstrate that the community is solidly behind with its commitment toward local funding.
Great, thank you.
Yes, good evening.
Hi, good evening. Neil Ellis, live at 17 Pine Street in Greenwood. I just wanted to voice my support for the project. I'm really excited about having a new high school. Doug Lyons has done a fantastic job as superintendent since he's taken over. I think he'd be a great person to lead a new high school building project. Secondly, I was involved in a high school building project in Wilmington where it was built in 2014, where Doran Whittier was the design architect. They did a fantastic job. They met all of the needs, all the programmatic needs, all the design needs. Again, Wilmington is a community that values the arts, so they had built in a lot of art space. And that was on time and under budget. They did a fantastic job, so I just wanted to voice that. And I hope we do a new school instead of a reno. It doesn't make any sense. So, thank you.
Hi, my name's Chris Crone. I've got two children in the Dolbear School now. I wanted to ask what factors are being highlighted in the current SOI that are different from last year's SOI? What are we pointing to justify the new buildings?
So I think one of the things that we did is we articulated it with more clarity and more examples around how the state of the building is impacting teaching and learning. And I used some of the examples here tonight. We also really highlighted, again, the need for and the gaps with ADA accessibility. And so in our there's a lot of similarities between this and the last from 19 to 20, but things that were highlighted are things like, again, the size of our elevators and kind of the difficulty people or a person with disabilities would have negotiating the high school, getting in and out of the courtyard, getting down to the gym. And so those are big parts, as well as all of the other mechanical parts of our building that are really kind of lacking and need to be replaced as well. So we just really built on what we had last year. So the FY19 was a very good SOI, but I think what we did this year is we added more information with more clarity around how it's impacting teaching and learning. We also had our architects take a look at it and contribute to kind of the text. We had teacher leaders contribute to the text as well. And so so instead of just a few people kind of getting eyes on it and contributing to the narrative, this year we really kind of opened it up and kind of got some professional help as well. So we think it's a pretty good document, and we think we make a pretty strong case. I think when you add the fact that where we are with NEASC, that's another contributing factor which we think will make a compelling case for us to be accepted into the FY20 submission.
And maybe as a follow-up question to one of the earlier ones, what efforts, community efforts, did you find to be effective with respect to the galvanize efforts that we might consider repeating or reinvigorating with respect to the new high school?
So I, like Amy, was not here for the galvanized movement. I hear all about it, and I'm looking forward to being part of the new movement. But I think maybe Tom or Chris Callanan might be able to speak to that.
Well, the biggest thing about the galvanized movement that was so incredibly not only important but ultimately successful was that it was an organic and grassroots effort that built easily over the course of about a year and a half or so, just in making the case and building the case for not only the need to convince and inform and educate the members of the community across all parts of town, but also to put out some factual data around what costs would be and around what the different scenarios are. Sometimes there's, one of the things that I think made it most effective was around the public information campaign. So there wasn't a lot of space for sort of misinformation or a lot of space for speculation. There was some really crisp data that was shared in some very open and transparent ways that I think really made that quite successful. So that's we would certainly want to model that again, but that really requires lots of people coming forward in an organizing way, and then people who are really willing to put aside lots of nights and weekends, rolling up their sleeves and putting some creative energies around advocacy and campaigning. Because quite honestly, it's a campaign. It's an election. We got to win an election at town meeting, and then we got to win an election at the ballot box. And because it's a political matter, the ability for the school department in particular to have a parent and community group as those advocates, state ethics laws gives the superintendent only so much leeway in becoming a political advocate. And that's something that we as not only school committee as elected officials, but townspeople really have to get behind. There's only so much that appointed officials can do to not cross the line of campaigning. It's frankly an election, and we have to win the election, and we win that in some really transparent ways.
This is a naive question, but
no.
How were those community groups formed?
It was very grassroots. I mean, at the time, there were phone calls, there were emails, there were coffee hours in people's homes. I mean, it was very organic. Chris? Yeah.
Involved people that stepped up to the plate and became the leaders of that group. They had a lot of help, but they became the organizers, and they kept everything heading, kept the momentum going in the right direction.
Okay.
They established that group as the authority of what the facts were.
And we have in the back of the room one of the leaders of the galvanized movement, right here. So, we gave you a couple years off, right? Just saying. Yeah, please do. Thanks.
Hello, I'm Roland Drarick, and I have one kid in the high school and one kid in Galvan. And I'm curious, you presented sort of a layout, and in the existing layout, you had a red, yellow, and green color code. And in the new layout, it was all blue. So my sort of question is, how much, if we were to color code that your new plan as green, yellow, and red, does that equate to mainly green, which represents what NEASC seems to like for a layout, or is it all yellow? So what I understood, it was being 10% above or below the actual value, and if it was above, it was green, and if it was below, it was red. And so I'm interested in what they're actually volunteering to help fund, or is that all up to the schematic that you come up with?
The classroom sizes, the space sizes for the entire building are dictated by educational plan and specifications that the MSBA provides, and they're available on their website. So if you were to do a renovation addition or a new building, essentially the whole building would be yellow. So it would all fall within that 10% over 10% below. So you're basically right-sizing the building for the population, for the programs that are being offered.
Okay. So is then the goal sort of to make it big enough as possible, so that, because you don't really want to be under by 9%.
Correct. No, you want to right-size the building. And what's going to happen is, in part of this eligibility phase, is that you're going to go through and have a discussion with the MSBA about future enrollment. So they will be doing enrollment projections for the community, and they'll be talking with the school department, school committee in the town on what those numbers are, because sometimes communities have a view of where their growth is versus what MSBA may have in terms of their view, looking back at cohort survival and historical data. So all that'll be factored into whatever this building is going to be in terms of number of students that they're going to expect to see in there.
Okay, thank you.
Can I say something?
Sure.
The blue and yellow and red colors that you were looking at, those were designed around the right size for each of those, and they're based on the function for those classrooms. So when we talk about red, green, yellow, we're talking about the size of the existing spaces. Yep. As soon as we go to a new building, everything is right-sized, and that's what the MSBA is paying for. You don't want to oversize a building because then you're paying too much and adding too much space. And that's what we're looking for, everything to be the proper size.
Yeah, it's all these guys right in here.
Yep. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Christopher Bossi. I'm a recent graduate of Wakefield High School. I was actually the valedictorian of the class of 2018. And first of all, I'd like to say that I definitely support building a new high school. You can see that map, there's a lot of red, but besides that, the map doesn't show like the quickest route through the building, the courtyard, is blocked off half the year because of the weather, and during the other half of the year you have to climb a hill. There's a 5-way intersection right over there. We call it Crash Corner. And just in general, it's definitely in need of renovations, or a full-out rebuild, I would say. But there's a couple points I'd like to make. So I've noticed a lot of talk about, like, we need to build a building for 21st century learning, and that's certainly true. But there's a few things I'd like to say about my time here at the high school. I mean, I certainly enjoyed it, but I've noticed that the point I want to make is that a 21st century building isn't going to help if we're still using 20th century teaching methods. And like I've noticed, for instance, you can see they're talking about not enough space and better accommodations. But at the same time, it seems like a lot of the anti-vaping policy involves restricting the use of bathrooms, which just makes accommodation worse. And don't get me wrong, we definitely need to combat vaping, but it just doesn't seem to help. It certainly didn't stop any of my classmates from vaping. And besides that, I think demonstrating a focus on like improving, like I saw a good amount of improvements in the educational program here while I was at the high school. And I think further focusing on that, like I think we especially need to focus on civics and in the mathematics program, for instance, I love mathematics, but a lot of mathematics at the higher levels, unless you're going into a career in like science, technology, engineering, stuff like that, people who aren't going into those careers, for instance, I think a restructuring of the math program to help better focus on the practical things that they can do with that would definitely benefit them, because I saw a lot of people take math classes that they're never going to need to use. So I just think if we show an enthusiasm for improving the education here, I think that will demonstrate to the state, okay, this is the kind of school we want to give money to. Because throwing money at problems doesn't always help them, but if you combine the money with an effort to strive for things that money alone can't improve, then you get better results and you probably get more money. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Andy Bray. I want to thank you for having this. I had the pleasure of going to the budget forum in January, which kind of quickly descended into a school building forum discussion. And one thing that was really clear to me from being at that session was, wow, we really need to be having this conversation as Wakefield. There are some wildly divergent views about what we might accomplish with this project, and there were also some even wilder ideas about how we get there. And I think it's really important that we're starting this discussion now and having it in a public way. I think we need to continue it, though, because I think what would be really helpful would be to have a process between now and the time when we're approved for MSBA funding where we have a near consensus view about what we really want to do. I had the pleasure of sitting in on the visioning sessions with Dora Whittier back in 2015-16, and having participated in that, it's really clear to me that putting a science wing in the parking lot is not a long-term solution for Wakefield, nor is it economically responsible thing to do, because it will completely discount our ability to qualify for MSBA funding anytime soon. Having said that, I think we need to look at, go back to the preliminary feasibility study. People should really unpack that, look at what options are there, and think of that as a starting point, and really start a bigger conversation, some of those in-between measures where we do some add-on and reno, and look at the numbers for that and really talk as a community about what makes the most sense for us and how do we go about doing it. But I don't think, I look at that 6 to 7 year timeline, I think we may have managed to accomplish the Galvan in 5.5 years. I was trying to think of where the compression happened, and I think it was between the feasibility and design phase. But that having said that, I really think, for anyone that's been listening to Facebook this past week, we really need to be having this conversation in a bigger way and in a more expansive way. And I'm not sure what that looks like, but I'm looking forward to being a part of it. So thanks for starting it.
Thank you. I just want to make note that we're coming up to 8:30, which we need to have a hard start, a hard stop at. But there are a couple more people in line, so we could certainly accommodate that. But again, this is the beginning, not the end of this conversation. Please.
Hi, my name's Lisa. I am a Wakefield graduate, 2005, and I have twins in Woodville. I have a request to the superintendent. I knew about this meeting via your text message. I'd like to request that you continue sending messages to the parents so that we can get involved with this. My kids are in kindergarten, so I am very new to this process. My second question is, because I'm new to this, I don't fully understand the accreditation. You say that we are in probation mode. If it does take us 7 years, are we going to lose that probation, or are we going to lose that accreditation? And then also, what would that affect our students?
So we are. Do you want to?
No, I was going to.
What's it?
It's all you, Doug.
So it's a great question. We are not going to lose our accreditation. Amy pointed out in her presentation, or her words, that it's mutually beneficial for NEASC and for us to maintain our relationship. So NEASC has no intention to take away our accreditation, none, okay? And so they will continue to work with us. We'll do a progress report for them in 2021 and 2022, just to update them and tell them where we are at. And part of that update will be whether we were accepted into MSBA, which would address the physical plant, which is why we have an accreditation issue to start, right? And so it's not going to affect students, it's not going to affect program, it's not going to affect anything that we do here in regard to our business, right? The oversight that the state now has over schools is different than it was 25 years ago. We just went through a coordinated program review from the state, and we came through it, and we did pretty well. One of the areas of commendation was, kind of the quality of teaching that's happening in our classrooms. That was cited as a positive area, as well as other areas that Amy brought up tonight. So it's not going to affect students, it's not going to affect teachers. At this point, it's something that they're just really citing that the physical plant is getting to the end of its shelf life, right?
All right, thank you.
You're certainly welcome.
Thank you.
Felix Freeman, High Street in Greenwood. I've lived in Wakefield all my life. I went to, that was the junior high. There was no such thing as a middle school back then, 62, 64. I started as a sub here in 05, and I walked around that part of the building. And for over 40 years, not a single thing was done to that building. Floors were patched, ceilings were all stained, the roof leaked, you could take a shower anywhere. The heating in The heating in the windows, junk. The whole school needs a good scrubbing and paint job. I was wondering if there's money aside from the school budget to do some sprucing up, because I told the former principal, the kids have a right to come to a clean, attractive, old school, and I was wondering if there's anything available. Are they done doing lockers and floors?
No.
They're still going to replace the lockers in the building? 'Cause they haven't done it in a few years now. And I asked Dr. Zreich, when you do these new lockers and floors, why aren't you painting the hallway first? And he says, we don't want to spend the money with the coming renovations. Those were his words. And so it makes sense you do a all over, you paint it first. And that's what I'd like to see happen, to get in and give it a good paint job. That's what it needs, aside from
We've
everything else.
certainly been looking forward to a new school for some time. So, you know, each year during the budget process, we do think quite a bit about what can be put into the high school, with really considerations around health and safety being a primary. We need to keep the school functioning, keep it safe for staff and students, but really balancing how much of an investment to actually make with the prospect of
I understand all
continuing to
that,
put forward.
but paint is just cosmetic. It'll change the whole look of a building. And if you ever want to just walk with me, I'm all over this building, so I see things that others don't. So, but as far as like the other gentleman said about looking at the back, building out back, I think you should look into that, because one of the plans, the tunnel to the, where would the buses drop the kids off, and how would they turn around? All these, drop-offs, those you gotta look at before. But I think you should check out the back too, because you could take part of the parking lot too. So, see you tomorrow.
Thank you.
you.
Michael Scolo from the Galvanize movement, ladies and gentlemen.
Good evening, Michael Scolo, 7 Swain Place. I know we're up against the clock, so I'll try and be brief. So thank you, Mr. Markham. Thank you for the forum tonight. So yes, I am the co-founder, co-leader of Galvanize Wakefield. So for those of you who were concerned about community support, we still have our Facebook page up, so you can go ahead and like it. It's rather static. I haven't posted anything up there in a long, long time, but hopefully if the opportunity presents itself, maybe sometime in the near future, we'll have something grand to post. So, but that's probably the best way to stay engaged for now. I've been talking to some of the fellow galvanizers that are up in the back, and we'll potentially get the machine going again if need be. I don't think I'll be the leader again, but at any rate, I just wanted to make that be known.
Wise, a sage who we all go to.
I'll be an advisor.
There you go.
I'll play an advisory capacity, but I just wanted to throw that out there. It's just Galvanize Wakefield. So pretty easy to find. I think we're up over 1,000 members. But I will say, in terms of, community support's been brought up a few times. I think we're much further along than where we were in terms of the Galvan project. That had failed multiple times for the debt exclusion. It was pretty bleak early on. I had a number of desperate meetings with Joan Landers and a few school committee members, and it was really out of an act of desperation that I formed Galvanize Wakefield. I didn't think it was ever going to happen. I mean, I walked out of meetings, and I'd go home to my wife and just say, we got to move, because there's no way I was sending my kids to that old Galvan. And, I'd look at the forum tonight and the turnout here, and I think this is very, very encouraging. Now we just got to be patient with the process. So hopefully things will turn out favorably 6 months from now. If not, I'd be concerned, or I'm curious to know if we've thought of some alternatives in terms of, I've got some ideas, and I don't want to derail the conversation because it could take another hour in terms of what I'm thinking. But anyways, thank you very much.
And thank you, Mike. But that's exactly the concept, the notion behind having this working group. So we don't, one, lose the momentum, and two, we're able to answer those if-then statements. If yes or if no, what are some options so we don't lose the momentum?
I mean, right now, I just feel like we're victims of the process. So
we are.
Yeah. So
yeah.
Not to detract
we're
from
in
any
a
of our
hurry up and wait mode right now.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
I think everybody in town wants this. So, thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you. We certainly don't want, even though we have this hard stop, more or less, I know it's after 8:30, but Thank you very much for coming out. This will be the beginning of a very long but exciting process. So thank you all for coming.